think yes, we're recording.
All right.
Walter, what's your question?
My question is, how did you originally get drawn to this, Matos?
To where?
How did you get drawn to NFTs?
It was one of these things where evidently Benton has been in this world forever,
Yeah.
but it was always just outside my peripheral. I heard little things about it, but I didn't really understand how to get involved. And like honestly, I met with Benton a couple of weeks ago. In my mind, it was like a weird Mac versus PC thing. And I felt like a lot of this world was inaccessible because from what I knew about like Bitcoin and mining and things like that, it was operating systems I weren't familiar with. I wasn't sure how wallets worked. A lot of it just seemed out of my reach, and without having anyone to be able to kind of speak about it with, I was lost.
Yeah.
And luckily, Benton stopped by for a studio visit, and a lot of the questions that I had, he was able to kind of give me guidance and give me an arena to start exploring, where before I was just like, this is really cool, but I don't know how to get involved.
I think it's really important. So one reason I asked is because I think a lot of people, including myself, have exactly the same experience. Meaning like, I heard about it, and I have an understanding of it, but I don't know how to get involved. But most importantly, it's something that's out of my reach. Either because I can't afford the machinery that it's on, or because I don't have the technical sophistication to navigate it. So it's one of the reasons I think it's important just to record this is because there's a lot of new artists who are coming to the space, and like real artists coming to the space. So I want to just be able to document people's initial impressions and reactions and experiences, right? Because this is a brand new thing, and you're a Bronx artist too. So one of the things, and I'm thinking about how do you present this to more artists, more Bronx artists particularly, but even new artists, right? Fledgling artists. How do you present it to people so that they're not afraid of it and that they can participate? Because it is going to be a huge thing. So thank you, because that's why I'm asking.
No, I just think it's super important to break those entry barriers.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it has such potential.
Yeah.
But there's also almost so much hype around things that it's hard to know where to get started or how to approach it. And as you said, with gas fees and things like that, these are things that traditionally as an artist, I've never had to worry about.
Yep.
Like for me, I just focus on the process. I focus on the artwork and the whole concept of marketing and putting my artwork out is honestly one of the biggest barriers for a lot of artists.
Yep.
It's one of those things where this is why there's that traditional gallery presentation is because a lot of artists are just horrible at marketing themselves. They don't realize that they're an asset. It's important to teach people the power they have and that the ability they have to be their own spokesperson.
Yep.
And I think that's the best part about what I see going on is that there's no longer that barrier that was there before. Like you could really just I just got onto Twitter, but just going out there and speaking to people and talking to other artists. I mean, honestly, in the past year, I've spoken to like maybe 2 other artists, and in the past 2 weeks on Twitter, it's been a flurry of information being exchanged and being able to talk to people and see people working on things that I find interesting that otherwise I would have felt like, oh, that's really interesting, but I'm over here and you're over there, and I don't know how to bridge that gap right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
So would you be, my second question, would you be interested in a space, a residency or art space that not only offered that as a component of the space, meaning offered to teach certain technical expertise on how to participate in NFTs, on how to create your own virtual wallet, and on how to, I don't want to say convert, because convert's the wrong word, on how to create a relationship between your physical art and your digital art, whether you're experienced or inexperienced.
No, I think that is almost like it has to be the next step for a lot of people, and especially for like galleries and residencies and things like that. I think one of the big transformations in that digital space is that erosion of the barriers that we're
Yeah, I mean, when you said galleries and institutions, like, I mean, even though we're recorded, I'll be perfectly honest, I want to dismantle galleries and institutions. Like, and hey, it's on, now it's officially on record. It's like, nah, because I think, because what you said about entry access, like entry point and access, like, you know, what I've learned in my time in the visual art world particularly is that so much of art, the value of art is driven by that entry and access, right? So much of it, right? Because that all is what appreciates and inflates the value of particular art, right? The fact that putting a spotlight on a particular work, entry and access, then putting a spotlight and showing particular places to appreciate that value, again, entry and access. So, so one of the things that I've seen, one of the things that I see is how do you create a system that's more equitable for artists, right? That allows for other spaces besides galleries and institutions to be the only groups to present, and for that to be seen as professional when they're presenting. Like, that's another thing that I'm definitely trying to dismantle, because why is it not professional all of a sudden because I'm not at Christie's, right? Beyond the fact that Christie's has spent generational wealth and time to establish themselves as a gatekeeper.
Exactly. But I mean, what you said before, I think it's important to dismantle and destroy the whole concept of the gatekeepers in a way, because it's blocking out so much incredible work and so many incredible people. It's such a narrow porthole, and it's almost like how many angels can dance in the head of like an eye of a needle. Like, there's so much impossibility wrapped up in the concept of the gallery, and so much, unfortunately, so much of an artist's time is spent trying to break into that. Instead of focusing on the work in the community, you're focused on trying to get any sort of in, so someone says you're good enough. Even though you know you're good enough, you're just waiting for someone else to acknowledge it. And it's a tragic way to spend your time.
It's a tragic way to spend your life. Like, pick me. Like, it's a tragic way to spend. Yeah.
That's not what artwork should be about. I feel like art should be able to stand on its own. And I think these new spaces are allowing eyes to get onto work, and definitely it's helping break down these artificial barriers of what is considered quality art and what is considered viable work. Artists and media artists and video artists, there's so many like niches in the art world that are horrendously neglected because there's this idea that, well, if I can't sell it, it's not viable. If I'm not able to create a market for it, then it's not worthy of my attention.
And you just literally brought up the second point for me why I'm really interested in NFTs, is because I have encountered, I think we've all encountered, artwork that is brilliant and has been made and should never be sold, right? Because selling it in and of itself will detract from the artwork. My example that I always go back to, there's an artist named Tasha who's here, and she created a piece called Justice, and basically it's the American flag woven from black women's hair, right? And so, brilliant piece. Why this piece can't be sold is because much of the narrative of the piece is about how black and brown bodies have been constantly used as a commodity and sold, right? So it's kind of impossible to then create this piece and then turn around and be like, I'm going to sell it for X amount of dollars, right? It's impossible, right? Which the artist knows. So the tribute, the testament to her is that she's never even entertained that. Like, people have come up to her. I've seen people come up to her and she's like, don't bother, because it's not for sale. But that puts an artist like her in a very unique and unusual situation, unusual in the fact that I've created a great piece that's recognized, but I can't sell it, right? One. And then with NFTs, how you can create a structure in which she can be supported, that the narrative of that piece can be supported, even as it travels, without the piece being sold, right? And that's the other thing for me, and I see that with you too, That's the other thing for me that I'm finding interesting, because I like political art, and political art, when I went to South Africa, I saw a high level of political art, and because it's not seen as unprofessional or somehow on a secondary tier, it's being presented and shown in a way that, everyone in the public can see it and can have a narrative around it, a conversation. That's not necessarily the case in our country, in the United States. So I also see NFTs as a really good opportunity for artists who are more in this realm to now find a way to support themselves without it being that I have to create to sell. Because creating to sell is capitalism, right? And creation precedes capitalism. So, and we all, and as you just said, and me too, we all get caught in this dynamic of having to create to sell because we need to survive. So that was the other thing that I've been thinking about, just in relation to this technology and NFTs and blockchain, more importantly, and how it can kind of change artists' worlds, but particularly Bronx artists. And you're a Bronx artist, so I definitely want to hear more about your experience instead of me talking, because you're one of the first Bronx artists to go into this realm, and where I classify all Bronx artists is like, yes, there are different levels of talent, but by and large, the Bronx has been marginalized. Extremely talented people come from the Bronx. Extremely talented people are marginalized just because of the zip code, not even about showing the work, just because of the zip code. So here is, again, another opportunity where a particular borough that's been marginalized in this city since its inception might be able to find a key to getting out of that, right?
Yeah. And that's what's also so interesting about this space, is that because it's beyond a physical location, it allows artists from all over the world to show and represent, and also it allows things that, what you mentioned before, like political art that has a tendency to be a bit more subversive, art that has either a message, art that is maybe dark and coming from hardship, art that is pushing the limit of what beauty is. And there's such a need for that in all society. I've met so many just random people in the past 2 weeks, people coming from countries that I've always wanted to visit, but I've never had a link to these people. And now being able to see their work and seeing the threads that tie us all together. I think that's the most interesting aspect, because we're all, to me, this is very new. And there are people who have been exploring this space for a while, but in the large scale scheme of art and art history, this is a historic moment.
Exactly.
And we're seeing threads and these narratives that are tying all these disparate people together. And what's so interesting is that for so long there hasn't really been an art movement. And I think that lack of an art movement has really affected the art scene and art history. So you think of like all the large things that happened, it almost seems like since the 80s, there's been like a weird lull. And in a weird way, the fact that we were so connected through internet and technology almost prevented real communities from forming, because as soon as something started to get attention, it was co-opted by outside interests to make money off it.
Well, don't get me started on my conspiracy theories. that's my. Don't get me started on that, because but you're right, and like, right. It's not even the internet, but social. I'll say social media. For me, it was social media, because it's not necessarily the internet, because the internet is still this unwieldy thing that represents everyone, right? Our digital selves, but absolutely, when you talk about social media and the beginning of social media, like, it's not a real community. It's a manufactured community. So I totally agree with you there.
Like, there's also that lack of a gestation period. Because if you look at like a lot of these like art movements, it was people who weren't necessarily making the same kind of work, but they were in a similar physical space and they communicated with each other. And through their interactions and through their building of community, even though their work was very different, they shared a thread that tied them all together and allowed them all to grow. And with social media and these technologies, unfortunately, a lot of times you're not allowed that gestation period. You're not allowed that time to grow and build and develop these relationships, because as soon as something gets slightly popular, it's
automatically out there, or you feel compelled. This is great.
Yeah.
This is great. This is a great point too, because you feel compelled to put it out there. Like I find, like in all the art forms right now, like for writers, like drafts, right? Like writers do drafts, right? But drafts are gonna go the way of the wayside. They're gonna eventually, right? Why? Because of this need that as soon as you've made something, you've got to put it out there and market it. Not that you have to go through it like 5, 7, 10, 15, 20, 30 times before you show it to somebody. But there's the need. It's like, well, at least even for opinion, even if it's just for opinion, I find that with myself, right? And one of the people who inspired me and reminded me that drafts are always for the writer, not for anybody else.
Yeah.
Always for the writer. He was like, don't rush your draft. Don't rush your draft stage.
Mm-hmm.
Don't rush the draft stage, because that's really the stage for me. And and then once I found that, it gave me a freedom, because I lost that for a long period of time. Right? So it's it's really cool what you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's so good. I'm actually thinking, I'm going to actually stop here. How do I do that? I guess, here we go.